If I could have one superpower, what would it be? Well, Dagdy Buckus Volcha, hi, hello, and welcome, John O'Sullivan Irish Pagan School. And this is a Keshta question that was presented over in our Patreon. And so, to answer that person's question, I need to follow the tradition of, a bird being put to the Kesht by saying the answer, not hard to say but hard to explain or hard to choose because I'm a big kind of hero nerd. I'm a big superhero nerd, comic book nerd, all of that kind of stuff as well. And some part of it does come from reading the old Irish mythology when I was growing up. And the stories of Cuchulainn, Fionn McCool, etc. Although I wouldn't classify Cuchulainn or Fionn McCool as heroes, maybe at a push anti-heroes. Although Fionn McCool specifically it really embodies that either you die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain kind of elements to his character arc and story arc. Um, but we're talking about powers, we're talking about abilities, and the difficulty that we have with this as we explore the concept of superpowers is invariably there isn't just one ability on its own. In many cases, the heroes or these characters have multiple interlinked abilities that allow them to kind of function. Because, for example, Superman, like, he has super strength in his muscles, but if he doesn't also have super bone structure to endure that, the first time he tried to leap a tall building in a single bound, he'd shatter every bone in his leg. Or his ability to fly, because many people are like, oh yeah, I absolutely choose flying. But unless you have the ability to propel yourself through the air as much as flying, then you're actually just levitating. Or unless you have the endurance to kind of expand your lung capacity to hold your breath for a long period of time, you're kind of restricted with how far you can actually fly up or down in those circumstances. If we take Wolverine, for example, everyone's like, oh yeah, cool, bone claws, etc. But it's if he didn't have the super mutant healing factor as well, every time his bones erupted out of his body, he'd bleed to death. So when we talk about these kind of abilities, invariably it's a collection of abilities that kind of interlink to perform or to provide this kind of heroic capacity for an ability. Now, why am I talking about this? Why am I kind of presenting this question if I'm John O'Sullivan of the Irish Pagan School? Well, as I've grown older over time, I have kind of found a interlinked series of abilities which I really do want. And these abilities are actually documented in the ancient Irish Law Tract, known as the Brehon. So the Brehon was a structure of legal documents, legal kind of precedences, which were set down in the 8th century. So that's 800 Common Era. And within that, we find a lot of different kind of records or information about the structure of society, how things are things, the judgments that are presented, the honor prices that would have to be paid in certain circumstances. It's a pretty extensive document. And where am I finding heroic or superhero or super abilities in this? Well, in one very specific cast or one very specific skill set, which would allow someone to change their societal status. And this is to go from being a bard to becoming a filler. So, in ancient Irish society, anyone could tell a story. Sitting around a fire, having a chat, having banter, anyone could tell a story. But to perform a story, to perform an educational story, to kind of enlighten and bring someone along the narrative, to give them the moral of the story, to remember those stories, to be able to kind of provide them not just as entertainment, but as a recognition of ancestral memory, tribal memory. It was a pretty big fucking deal because we had no written language back in those days. Ireland existed as an oral tradition, an oral society. And so the bards were very fucking important. But there was an upper level of bard. There was a higher kind of cast, a higher kind of skill set, which would take someone from being a bard to a filler. And the reason why it had to be defined in law, because a filler within the structure of the Tua, within the tribal status, existed within what was known as the Cernimid, or the free kind of nemid, the free structure at the top end of the society. And in many cases, a fellow could command the same honor price for harm done to them as a king or a chieftain. So fillers are pretty fucking big deals. And so in order to go from being a bard to being considered a filler, that had to be laid down very detailed and very specifically in the law. And so We have a list of abilities. We have three specific abilities which a bard would have to be recognized for, would have to be able to perform, would have to be able to display time and again in order to kind of shift not just their skill, not the recognition of their ability, but that would then also shift their status, the recognition of their status within their tribe and actually within other tribes because Phyllis Cernemids were able to travel outside of their Tua and still be considered someone not to fuck with. So, yeah, what are these abilities? We actually have them listed out, and it's very fascinating to consider. There is Chennaib, imbas forosnai, and dichetal de chennaib. And now those are my pronunciations of it. I will put it down in the description as well as kind of translations and information. But essentially, Chennaib is a form of specific structure, rhythm, or meter to your kind of performances, to your poetry, to your storytelling. It had to conform to a very specific rhyme and reason and flow. There had to be a flow of recognition and beats within the actual telling of the story, the performance of the poetry. And it was something that required a lot of skill, a lot of talent. Now, a lot of these abilities, also had some element of, it was believed, magical practice to them, some form of occult knowledge that went along with it. And so, specifically when we get to Chenem Lejo, talking about this beat, this flow, this rhythm, this way of performing your information, it can be linked back to some of the oldest form of poetry that we have in records, known as Rosk poetry. Now, whether Rosk poetry is the meter for Chenem Ledo, I can't say for sure, but I'm still pursuing that myself. Um, but it suggested that it's also some form of divinatory incantation, some form of ritual structure to the flow of the words, to making sure you're meeting the required kind of beats in order to kind of get that right element, that right kind of moment, where you're going outside of the words and accessing a greater level of information. Which takes us on to our second ability, which is known as imbos Pharasna. Imbos Pharasna, which literally translates as knowledge which illuminates. Knowledge which illuminates is a specific kind of gift for, I suppose, what people would consider now clairvoyance, or prophetic knowledge, some form of information or access to information or knowledge in its totality that exists outside of an individual or a person. So it doesn't exist within your memory. It's not that you remember everything. It's the fact that you can access knowledge in its totality. We see this in the stories. Again, I mentioned them at the start, Phil McCool. Phil McCool with the salmon of knowledge. So he bursts a blister on the salmon, puts it in his thumb, and then he tastes all of knowledge, or he consumes the ability to access knowledge. So then throughout the rest of his stories, whenever he puts his thumb in his mouth, he is engaging in this function of imbos Pharasna. He then has access to knowledge in its totality, and he can answer any question put against him. He can kind of present a solution to anything because he has access to knowledge in its totalities, which is what imbos Pharasna is. So it's not just knowing everything, it's the knowledge that actually is insightful. It's the knowledge that illuminates, that kind of educates, that kind of shows the answers to pretty much everything. So it's a fascinating one. It does again linked with this occult kind of knowledge or ability. And occult isn't like, you know, a bad word. Occult literally just means hidden knowledge. It's not anything other than that. It's the fact that it's not common knowledge, and that's what makes it occult knowledge. And so the structure of Imbos Pharasna is this access to greater knowledge in its totality. Um, and again, Fiona's very famous for it. But again, all Phillas could do this. A Phila put to the Kesht would have to be able to access Imbos Pharasna, would have to be able to access this information and provide the answers, whether or not they knew it beforehand or not. And then the last part of it is Dichtel din Chennaib. And Dichtel din Chennaib is another form of, well, another kind of structure or form for which the information is presented, but it's not just a practice, rhyme, rhythm, and meter. This is a very specific kind of speaking off the top of the head, which is kind of what it translates as dictail the Kennep, where someone put to the question would be able to access the answer through Imbus Pharesna, but then they would have to perform it ex extemporaneously, like right straight away, like on the spot, spontaneously. And the performance of that then had to meet the right kind of meters, the right kind of rhythm. It had to be able to kind of flow in this information from the access to all knowledge in the right kind of structure to be able to show the performance and the skill and the ability. The other kind of side of detail, the chennaib, speaking off the top of the head, was linking with the imbas forosnai. Again, this idea of, and you can see why I said they're all interlinked abilities. It's the access to kind of prophetic knowledge. So someone would fall within this flow of the poetry, fall within the flow of the story, and through there they would speak a truth. They would speak from a divinatory kind of answer to it, whether the question was put to them or not, they would be able to provide in a very specific verse, quatrain, like structure, a vision. And so express the vision that they are receiving from knowledge in its totality in a very specific way so that people would know that this is not just someone having a rant or someone being able to performing a good story, that they have actually accessed something deeper and they're providing that information with greater insight that goes beyond the ken of mortal men or the abilities of a singular individual. And so that is the superpowers or the interlinked superpowers that I would choose. The ability to be able to access all knowledge, to have the answers, but then not just to have all of the answers, to be able to express the answers in a way that was engaging, that was entertaining, was to be able to bring people on board so that they would be following along. They would then have the illumination moment of understanding, of comprehension, not just comprehension. Comprehension, comprehension is the beginning. It's how we then take what we learn as fact or information and then couple it with experience to really reach the point of true understanding or comprehension. And it's kind of making it practical, making it real, and having those transformations of self based on what we know. And that is something I find absolutely fascinating, something I work out myself and I have personally had experiences of in my own abilities, and that's speaking for myself, not of my own abilities. I'm getting around myself. Obviously, I am still tongue-tied. I'm not the greatest. I'm not even, I don't consider myself a filler. I refer to myself as a bard. I'm a Dagda bard, because I tell all of his stories. But I'm looking for opportunities to explore this information, to know what I need to do to go further with this. And the Irish Law Tracts have given me very specific examples of where I need to be pursuing skill, talent, or beyond skill or talent, what kind of next level stuff I need to be growing towards. Um, so this has been an interesting kind of exploration, really, of superpowers, but I don't want to be lifting like cars. I don't want to be leaping buildings in a stall in a single bound. Like I don't want to fly. I don't have any of those. But the idea that I could access knowledge, have the answers that people need, provide them the answers in a way that is engaging, entertaining, and real for them, that to me is a power that can change the world. And that is something that I want to pursue. So I've got a resource for you. I'm going to pop it down in the information below as well. It is from UCC, University College Cork. It's a lovely paper written by Professor John Carey, which talks about the three things required of a poet. And it is this chennaib, laedo, imbas forosnai, and dichetal. And he kind of goes into information about where it is recorded, what they talk about, and he even does touch on St. Patrick and how St. Patrick was like, oh, well, we'll allow you to do these things, but you can't do this one because that's magic. So if you're interested, pop down and grab the link there below. If you want to know more about any of the information about being a bard, I have a class on the Irish Pagan School, being a bard. And yeah, I would like to say thank you very much for the cast or question that presented to us. And until next time, look after yourself, take care, agus slán, goodbye.